This video contains themes of stalking, harassment, threats, and some intense situations that might be unsettling. Please take care of yourself and feel free to skip any parts that feel too heavy. If you enjoy these stories, hit that like button to help us reach more people, and let's get started. A man stalked me in the woods when I was stranded on a backcountry road at 3 a.m. Over the years I've been on Reddit, I have shared a handful of stories in this sub. This is one that I have been saving for whatever reason, and I think I am ready to share. This is probably my last post in L&M, since it's not very often that something happens that is worthy of an L&M post. Definitely not a bad thing, haha. I've shared my other few experiences, and I think I have saved the best for last. Everything mentioned here is 100% factual. Long read, but I believe it's worth it. I grew up in the South, tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete, yet it's nice, but along with that it's pretty boring being a teenager, and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good would come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to this were boring because you had been there so many times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill my gas tank up, grab something to drink, a cigarillo, and I would just take off driving around until the sun came up. It was a way for me to just clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m. and was also just the right amount of spooky. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than I was to bargain for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact it was in the summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable chilly night. So if I was to guess, it just had been around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring and I was in my zone. I decided to head down to a park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but it is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy like that. It is a normal paved road, but there is really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out further and further, becoming no houses and just the road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive at night is because of how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously, at around 3 a.m. in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow, normal little loop around the drive of the park. The night before, it stormed very badly. So badly, I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. Because of this, I came upon a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park, which must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that was super dangerous, and there was no way. At this spot on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to just back up in the grass beside me just a little, and then drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way since it was so late. So I started to back up off the road, so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tires were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately took my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service. Super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty pissed at me, but said they will pay for a tow truck to come get me out. My parents both drove small four-door sedans, and they would have been of zero help in the situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of human civilization, so I realized that I would be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone was able to get to me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. Not really much more I could do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the largest number of deer I think I've ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been 40 deer in this field just walking around and eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit one of them. So if I was to guess, they were about 30 yards out. This didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in front of your car and seeing 80 eyes staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall. But I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it and started to just browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have gotten over it quicker than I was because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally got a call back from my parents, letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way and about an hour and a half out from my location. Still to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, you have got to be fucking kidding me. I understood that I, and only I, was the reason I was in the situation I was in. So I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just make sure my doors were all locked, lie back in my seat, and take a nap to pass the time quickly. So that's what I did. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before, because I don't know how common it is. But there was a sixth sense alarm going off in my head telling me that I needed to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in, and the surroundings I was in is probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings and see nothing. I looked through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. A fucking pocket knife. I was very scared. Even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling is terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always just assume they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided not to mention the feeling I was having because I didn't want them to worry more, and I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling I had, and had nothing to back up why I was feeling that way, other than just being spooked out in general. No update from the tow truck guy, so we all assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because I felt like such a dick. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours, now have to spend a random $100 plus, and on top of all that, they were worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation, but worried. I told them I'll make sure to tell them when the guy arrives, and I'm sorry. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up, staring in the same direction right of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field. Every single one of them was stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn really quickly. They didn't even budge or look my way. They're all still completely glued to what was around them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over in the field. I know they were looking into the woods by them, but where I was at I was only able to see them. I could hear my heartbeat. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked, every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way they were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds the field was completely empty. I was petrified with fear. I knew that staying in my car was what would be the safest thing to do. But it's the worst feeling in the world when you feel like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed that it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it was the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where it was. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me and focused on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack you. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it is the tow truck guy. The lights on his truck felt like it was Jesus coming from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me, and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what had just happened to me, and that something is definitely out here nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole, "They are more scared of you than you are of them." Bullshit. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his and pulled me out of the spot I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up from it. The whole time he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued on that field, waiting for something. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow his truck out of there onto the main road again. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel, completely shook up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot I was stuck in, partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rearview mirror a man come out of the tree line behind where my car was and walk into the middle of the road, and watched us drive away. My heart stopped beating legitimately. I lost my breath, and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in this moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time watching me as I was freaking out, looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a long time, maybe even coming right up to my window and watching me as I slept. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words. All these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, he didn't move. Just watched us on the road. A million things went through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people up the road waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop or not. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there, more than anything. The second that we finally got out of the park and were able to be on a two-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver, and I did nothing below 70 miles per hour the entire way home. I flew through stop signs and stop lights. I absolutely did not care. The only thing on my mind was making it home. I got home, ran inside, very quickly acknowledged my parents and said sorry and thank you, and went to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep the rest of the night. I was searching for any sort of records of things happening in that area, escaped convicts, similar stories, etc. I came to the conclusion that the man was some sort of squatter or homeless. I read many things online about how it's common for the homeless in rural areas to build shelters in the woods, which does make sense to me entirely on why they would do that. But obviously, the unknown is the scariest part of it all. What if he wasn't homeless? What if he was going to hurt me? What if? There are so many possibilities of what could have happened, but the outcome that did happen is what I am most grateful for. I never told my parents this story until many years after it happened, and I was already an adult and had moved out. It freaked them the fuck out too when I told them. I never went back to that park. Ever. Even though I no longer live there, I still have no desire at all to ever go back there. I don't think I could even in broad daylight, with a ton of people around. I also made the decision to stop doing those late-night cruises. I did a few after that time with people, but even then I felt very uncomfortable and on edge. So man in the woods, let's not meet ever again. So I'm actually going to share a quick, useful tip shared by a commenter on the post. Don't know if anyone will read this, but when you get stuck in snow or mud with your car, you can try and use your floor mats for traction. Place them in front of your tire as close as you can for grip. Then slowly try to get traction. Don't just floor it. Hope this helps. This happened within the last 24 hours. I live in a large city in the US, and like many people I have taken it on myself to try and get back in shape during the new year, so I've recently gotten into running and lifting 5 days a week. Yesterday was a run day for me. I usually start at my apartment and cross over to this long park that runs the river close to my apartment. The park is filled with sports fields, tennis courts, and many runners along the pathway. I've been going 2 to 3 times a week for just over a month. I was on my run last night listening to a podcast minding my own business, and decided to go a little further than I normally do, to this longer stretch where the park sort of ends for like a half a mile before it picks back up. Kind of an area where they park equipment. Many people avoid this area due to it not being waterfront or ugly. I decided to run to the end of this area before circling back home. As I'm running, I see a man 200 or so feet ahead of me walking in my direction. Not unusual at all. I've passed like 40 people already, but this area is empty except him, and I, as most people, circle back. Still, I ride my bike here to commute for work and have never gotten weird vibes. I'm also an average-built man and feel pretty secure in most places in my relatively safe neighborhood. I keep running, listening to my podcast, when I notice the man's path is directly in line with me, as in if I continue 150 more feet, I'd run into him. So I shift to the other side of the path, 10 or so feet. Keep running, not paying attention. Look back up, and he's in my path again. Still no alarms. Maybe he shifted to get out of my way. And we did that thing where we both went. So I shift back to the side. I started on and I watch him. He shifts to my side. I'm thinking this guy's fucking with me. I'm 50 feet away, and between there and 20 feet, I keep shifting more and more quickly. He follows me exactly to the point. He is sidestepping instead of moving forward, waiting for me to reach him. At this point, I take his presence, and he is 6'3" at the shortest in jeans, and a black hoodie with the hood up. Can't really make out his face, due to a streetlight behind him casting a shadow, so I begin to realize, oh fuck. I come to a stop and go to pull my headphones out and begin the sentence, what the fuck, man? I get to what the fuck when he raises both arms above his head and begins to scream at me. No legible words I can hear over my podcast. I do notice he has something long and white or beige in his hands. At this point, I begin to backtrack, keeping an eye on him. All of a sudden, he dashes towards me, running with his arms stretched out to grab me. I turn and hightail it the other way. It should be known I am not in the best of shape. I've had numerous injuries requiring surgeries, and I've just done about 75% of my intended run for the night. But I've never ran faster. He kept pace and closed much of the distance, but when we started going slightly uphill, I continued to make ground. We came to a fork in the path. After about a minute of this, the two paths circled around a fenced-in area that contained construction vehicles, mowers, etc. I made it look like I was going one way, and at the last moment, dashed the other way. He kept looking for me in the bushes, prowling back and forth, and finally saw me on the other side of the enclosure. At this point, I was already on the phone with the police, trying to get help as I gulped down breaths of air. I was also warning runners, but he eventually just followed my pace opposite side of the fence. He kept ducking into darker areas around the enclosure, and eventually I lost sight of him. I began getting worried again and kept wandering around, warning people while I waited on the cops. After about 15 minutes of not seeing him, I pieced the fuck out of there, as the cops said they were close. The jog home was horrible, and any time a runner passed me, I would have a mini panic attack. I was in shock and running on adrenaline for the remainder of the night. I'm not really sure what happened or what was going on. It felt like it was from a movie. Today I checked the Citizen app and Twitter to see if anything had happened, and I'm not sure if it's related. It most likely isn't. But 5 hours after I called the cops, they pulled the body of a man out of the river a mile or two downriver from where the attempted attack occurred. The other side of the story, a stalker's point of view. I should preface this by saying that this is an extremely complicated and personal situation or experience, and I will try my best to abridge it. Names and any identifying information will not be used here. I have always had struggles with mental health issues from a young age, and by the time I was 15, things had become unmanageable for my parents. They decided to send me to a lockdown school after my freshman year in high school. I literally woke up one morning to two strangers in my home threatening me and telling me that I was going to a boarding school and that if I refused, that they would cuff me. To make the story short, I went. After a wilderness program, I was enrolled into an RDC, residential treatment facility. The school I was enrolled in was affiliated with some very abusive lockdown schools in the U.S., many of which have been, thankfully, shut down due to abuse. The school was extremely abusive. Isolation, forced medication, physical intervention, stress positions, attack therapy, withholding exercise and food, etc. were all common occurrences here. The detailed story of what happened here does not pertain to the one I am expressing here. What needs to be said is that the school took me, an already somewhat mentally ill child, and made everything a million times worse. If I had been a troubled boy before I came here, I was much worse after just a few days. I became a shell of a person and was disassociated most of the time, as I knew no other way to cope. A couple of weeks or so after I arrived, a boy named James came onto our unit, what they called our group of kids living in a dorm. This is where the experience I am trying to convey here really begins. I hated James at first. He rubbed me the wrong way, and I went out of my way to be an asshole to him. However, we ended up being in the same room together, and things began to change. I began to become enamored with him. We began spending a lot of alone time together, bonding. I didn't know it at the time, but I slowly began to fall in love with him. I identified as heterosexual, so to me it was more of a brotherly love bond, even though looking back, there were covert signs of a possible romantic relationship between us. Things at this school became worse and worse, and James and I sheltered each other from the storm of abuse. We were all that we had. We suffered horrible experiences together, and through that bond of trauma, something was created for us. I absolutely needed James to survive. It was like he was a part of me. Without him, I felt empty. He reciprocated these ideas, and we promised each other that we would never be apart and would continue our relationship as soon as we left the school. Luckily, James and his family lived only an hour away from my parents' home. The day came when he was discharged from the school. I was scheduled to go back without him, but after begging and pleading with my parents, I was allowed to be discharged as well. Overjoyed, I called James and told him the good news. He and I began seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week, and it was truly one of the happiest times of my life. He was my world, the only one who knew the terror of what I had been through. After a while, however, his parents noticed that James was overly physically affectionate with me, and also noticed how emotionally attached I was. I will never truly know the reason behind what happened next. I can only guess. I received an email one day from James. It stated that he thought we should spend less time together, and also included a barb at the bottom of the letter. At the bottom of this email, he said, "P.S. It's 72% now." I completely lost it. I grabbed the nearest sharp objects and slashed at my wrists, screaming, crying, begging, how could this be? I could not accept this. No one would ever understand me except for him, and I couldn't breathe without him. We saw each other a couple more times after this, but it was all different now. He was different now. After the last time I saw him, he told me he wanted to cease contact completely. It started with phone calls. I knew his house phone number and his cell, and I would call all day, sometimes not saying anything, other times begging in tears for him to see me, to love me again. I would beg his parents, plead with them. Then it escalated. I began to call his mother's cell phone and his mother's work phone. I obtained his father's cell phone and work phone as well, and would call those numbers. Again, sometimes I would plead, other times I wouldn't say anything at all. I would also manipulate a mutual friend of ours to call these numbers with me on the line, and I'd have her ask specific questions. Eventually, they had to change all of the numbers in the house. Before James requested to have no contact, we used to attend a church group together. I still knew where it was located and knew that he still went. I was dating a much older girl at the time, and I would have her drive me to the group so that I could try and see him. The first couple of times he didn't show, but I made sure to ask everyone there for information on him. The third time I showed up, he was there. I approached him and asked him if he really didn't love me at all anymore. He looked me in the eyes and said that no, he did not. I broke down in tears, begging him, causing a scene, until I was asked to leave. It must have been humiliating for him. He also identified as heterosexual. I then had my girlfriend at the time drive by his house in the middle of the night with me, and I would stare up at his window. This happened at least twice. I would just sit there and stare. I also had her knock on their door a couple of times as well to ask if James was home. Time passed, and I was somehow able to convince James to add me as a MySpace friend. This gave me hope that our relationship could be rekindled, though deep down I knew better. I realized that he had a girlfriend and messaged her. I manipulated her to meet me in person, under the pretense that he would not be told of our meeting. We met soon after, and I seduced her. I had her call him and ask if he had any desire to be my friend again. He said that he had no desire and that he pitied me. Again, I lost it. I continued to seduce his girlfriend and gained all sorts of private information from her, including the new house phone number, his new cell number, his MySpace password, their sexual activities, and family information. I hacked into his MySpace and shut it down. I then blew up the house phone and his cell. I screamed at his mother and gloated to him about how I had used his girlfriend. They had to change all of their numbers again. After one final phone call with James and his girlfriend, a switch in my head flipped. I was done. I had to stop this. It was over. I feel terrible for terrorizing this family. I wish that there was a way that I could apologize. I share this experience to let others in on the other side of what goes on in stalking. I was really sick. There was no excuse for my behavior, and I am lucky I wasn't arrested. There is much, much more to this story pertaining to what we went through together than what I wrote here, but I hope it could help someone understand why certain people engage in these types of behaviors. Today, I am a much different person. I still struggle with borderline personality disorder, but I have never acted out like that is stalking, since then. I am very fortunate to have a pretty stable life now, and it took me years to get where I am now. I hope this may help someone understand more about stalking behaviors. Schizophrenic stalker who thought we were dating. Okay, I tried to submit this the first time, but it didn't get through, so I made some edits in hopes that this one stays. Alright, here's another one from my books. A bit of backstory. My ex-girlfriend had a roommate, I'll name Lilo. Lilo always seemed a little off, but never in a threatening way. She had a rough upbringing with strict parents, considering she was trans, and she did suffer from depression. But nothing else to my knowledge. I would always talk and hang out with her when my girlfriend was gone, because we were both social rejects, and I know how shitty it is to be alone. Fast forward a few years later, after my ex and I had long split up, I was living with my long-term boyfriend and hadn't heard from Lilo in forever. I assumed she was okay and healthy. One day, as I went to get the mail, I got a letter from someone with no name on the envelope. It was kind of bulky, so I was curious. As I am a hermit with severe social anxiety and don't talk to people, I ecstatically tore open the letter and realized it was from Lilo. It consisted of about 5 pages. 3 explaining that she had to go into a psych ward for a while because she was severely depressed and tried to kill herself. Okay, first red flag. But I was so naive to that stuff, I really just felt bad. Another page of poems, which didn't surprise me because she always wrote beautiful poetry, and a $2 Canadian bill, which again didn't surprise me since she always gave cool old stuff to close friends. It was actually really nice to hear from her. I searched her up on Facebook and thanked her for the letter, and we started talking more about this and that, mostly life things. When she asked to start hanging out like old times, I agreed because she was never someone to make me uncomfortable or raise my anxiety levels. I really had no idea what was going to happen in the coming month. The first few times hanging out were great. We would drive around, smoke some cigs, listen to music, go out and eat at McDonald's, and talk about literature. I actually had a blast, but since I wasn't used to being that social with anyone but my boyfriend for the longest time, it did mentally wear me out quite fast, and I couldn't keep up. I continued to talk to her on Facebook, and I did reject hanging out maybe 2 or 3 times, mentally worn out, before she started getting really annoyed and short with me. She started acting possessively toward me, and began asking things like if I was blowing her off my boyfriend. I honestly figured she was just feeling hurt, because she didn't really have any friends, and maybe she had just grown attached to me. Things went on like this for a couple of weeks, then it started getting worse really fast. If I didn't answer her right away, she would drive 45 minutes from her house to our apartment and ring the buzzer consistently until someone answered the door. Then she would try to bully me into hanging out with her, since she felt like she wasted gas and energy on me. This is where I started distancing myself from her, because I knew in my gut something was wrong, and I think it made her snap. This is when she started waiting for my boyfriend to leave for work before buzzing at all hours of the night. She would drive by the apartment almost daily, sending me message after message on Facebook, calling and texting my phone all the time. One time, my boyfriend and I got into a verbal argument, which she had heard since she was standing outside our window. She called the cops, telling them he was domestically abusing me. I was deathly embarrassed trying to explain to the cops that my boyfriend didn't beat me into oblivion. I was pissed off, and my instincts told me that it was her. After prying for an hour, she nonchalantly told me she did, in fact, do it. I was pissed off, and she kept telling me she cared too much for me to let some man hurt me, that she was worried, wasn't going to put up with his shit, and would kill him to ensure I was safe, etc. I felt completely violated, and this crossed the line for me. I started contemplating how to cut her out of my life, preferably without the police being involved. The worst happened maybe 2 weeks later after I found out I was pregnant. My boyfriend and I were taking a shower together. We did this to save time, water, and whatever, and then our doorbell started buzzing. I was exasperated and just told my boyfriend, who was growing annoyed, to ignore it and she would leave, but she didn't. She proceeded by buzzing a neighbor and told them she lived with us in the apartment, had forgotten her keys, and needed to be let in. The neighbor unknowingly let her in. So, in the shower, my boyfriend and I were just talking when someone started pounding on our door. Not just knocking, but pounding extremely hard, kicking and jiggling the door handle. Thank God we always bolted, chained, and locked our door. At this point, I snapped. I was just so angry, I jumped out of the shower, haphazardly threw a towel around myself, and whipped open the door, demanding an explanation as to what the fuck this was, and reminding Lilo that when someone doesn't answer their door, you leave, and don't try every possible way to get into their house for an hour. Coldly, she looked at me, then toward the bathroom, which had the shower still running, and all she said in a low voice was, "You're showering with him? How could you?" My eyes must have widened to 1,000 suns when I responded, "That's my boyfriend, the father of my child who I have a relationship with. It isn't any of your business, and I think you need to leave now." Her face scrunched into what looked like someone force-fed her lemons through her asshole, and she then told me she wasn't leaving. That we apparently had some sort of relationship together. Not sure where this came from. We were never sexually or romantically involved the whole time I knew her, and she said I was coming back with her. She mentioned she didn't care how pregnant I was. She would forcefully drag me out with her. This terrified me, because even though she was very feminine, she had a good 2 feet on me, and actually did work out, and I wouldn't have stood a chance. I panicked and tried to slam the door as my boyfriend almost took our whole shower down trying to scramble out to the front door upon hearing that she stuck her foot out to prevent the door from closing and started forcing it open until she saw my boyfriend standing there huffing like a bull about to charge completely nude. He was too pissed off to even get a towel, which we did actually laugh about afterward. All he had to do was look at her and tell her to get the fuck out, or he would break her ass if she wouldn't let us close the door. Lilo calmly removed her foot and said her last words to me. "You two know how to fuck with someone's head. Don't worry, you will get yours. You can't go around treating people like shit and expect nothing to happen to you. If I ever contact you again, it will be by letter." Then she walked out and drove off. I was hysterically angry, bawling, falling apart in a total mess, trying to piece together what just happened and trying to remember if I unintentionally led her on since I'm a sympathizer, to which my boyfriend reinforced that what happened was in no way my fault, and no, I did not lead her on. My boyfriend and I eventually calmed down, and we haven't seen her since then. Oddly enough, I was talking to my ex a week after this happened, and she informed me that Lilo had to go to the ward for a while because she was diagnosed as schizophrenic and started refusing to take her medication, which would explain the made-up relationship and stuff. So she packed all her animals into a car, doused her house in gasoline, and tried to burn herself down with it. It failed because a neighbor noticed and called the fire department, and they took her in for a while until she was stable. Lilo, you were all too many levels of disturbed for me. Let's not meet again. Stalker in college. Hi everyone. I want to start off by saying that I posted this story a while ago, but it was on a different account, one I've since deleted. And a lot has happened with this person since the first time I told the story on here. I tried to find the post but couldn't, so I'm posting it again because I am currently scared and angry over this situation. Anyway, let's get started. When I was a freshman in college in October of 2018, a guy I'll call Ron Jones stalked me. I met Ron through one of our mutual friends, Chris, because they were in a school club together. When I met Ron, I thought he was kind of strange, but he was nice and seemed interesting. He claimed to be Slavic and had an accent to back that up. I just thought that he might seem weird because of cultural differences. I go to school in a rural southern area, and I figured the culture shock between here and wherever he was originally from was a lot to handle. Anyway, we exchanged numbers and texted infrequently for a couple of weeks. On October 3rd, 2018, a friend of mine and I went to a drag show on our campus. We weren't out super late, but it was dark when the show ended, and we began walking back to our dorm. I'd been texting Ron a bit during the night because he was unable to get a ticket to the drag show, and he wanted to know how it was. At some point in the conversation, I mentioned that I wanted to grab some orange juice on the way back to my dorm. Don't know why I mentioned that to him. I think I was just making conversation. My friend and I stopped in the convenience store near our building, so I could get said orange juice, and Ron was already there. He said something about buying the juice for me, and I thanked him but declined. He got kind of mad and started to walk away, which was odd to me, but I let it go. My friend and I walked out of the store and saw that he was standing outside. Our dorm was actually right across from the building where the convenience store was, so he saw us enter the building. My friend and I parted ways and I walked up to my room, which was on the second floor of the building, facing the convenience store. I kicked myself for doing this now, but I went to my window, opened it, and yelled down to Ron when I saw that he was still standing there. I apologized for declining his offer to buy the juice for me, because I felt like I had been rude. Guilty conscience, I guess. He stood below my window, started talking to me about random stuff, and at one point he said something that was odd. He was like, "Can I flirt with you?" I enjoy doing that. And I just laughed and said, okay, because I had no clue how to respond to that, and I just figured he was a flirtatious person. Stupid, I know. But that's not the dumbest thing I did. I ended up going outside to sit and talk to Ron for a little bit because I felt bad for being rude earlier, as if declining someone's offer to buy you something is rude. Geez. While we were outside, he didn't say anything of note, and he was acting pretty normal. It got cold out, so he asked if we could go inside to talk, and I said sure. At this point in the year, I'd had several guy friends over to my room just to do work and chat, so I didn't see an issue with it. And things started out normally, but they quickly got scary. Out of nowhere, Ron basically turned into a different person when we were alone in my room. He stopped blinking, he held eye contact super intensely, and he was laughing in this really low, creepy way. On top of that, his Slavic accent disappeared. That's when he told me he had lied about being Slavic and that he's native to the state our college is in. He got increasingly more creepy, and there was nothing I could do about it, because I had a single room in my freshman year. At one point, he grabbed me in a hug and wouldn't let go of me until I said, "Let go of me right now," 3 times or so. He told me he'd done a lot of bad things, and that if I wanted to put him in jail, he could give me the names of people who have evidence against him. He said he hates Jews and black people, and everyone until they give him a reason not to hate them. He said a lot of weird, nearly sexual stuff to me as well. Like, he went on and on about how showering alone isn't fun, and that it's better with another person, and that he'd be willing to do that if I wanted to. Keep in mind, this guy had a girlfriend, and he acknowledged that. He even said he'd go after me if he weren't dating someone, which freaked me out. He asked if he could sleep in my room, and I said no, and I used that to tell him that I was ready for bed and that he needed to leave. As he left, he said, "Do you want to know how non-secure the locks on your door really are?" He also pulled a few IDs out of his wallet, all with different names. I closed the door on him and looked through the peephole. He stood there, looking at the door, for an uncomfortably long time before leaving. After that, he called me multiple times throughout the month, always at weird times. He started appearing everywhere I was around campus. The friend who had introduced us, Chris, actually started walking everywhere with me, because he noticed Ron following me around and lurking around corners when I couldn't see him. Apparently, he was around me a lot more than I realized because Chris began carrying a knife whenever we went places. Ron was everywhere and he would come up to me and put his arm over me and whisper stuff like, "We need to talk," whenever he saw me. For a while, he would lurk outside my dorm, but that stopped all of a sudden one day. I later found out that Chris had told my RA about Ron and that he had been banned from my building. I hadn't done that myself because I thought I was overreacting. I wasn't. I blocked him on my phone, and he hasn't contacted me since. He did apologize to me one day on campus last semester when we ran into each other, and I was actually willing to accept it and move on until recently. So here I am 2 years later, and everything that happened with Ron has come back up again. I found out recently that he has a history of stalking women. Like, an extensive history going back at least 5 years. I met another victim of his who he stalked before coming to my university. She had gone to community college for a bit, and he stalked her while he was also a student there. He followed her to our university after apparently being suspended from the school after 3 separate stalking incidents were linked to him. The victim I met told me something worrying. Ron is currently an RA on our campus, and she was one of his residents. When she told the residential office that Ron had stalked her in the past, they told her all they could do was have her move dorms, which she did. They then said they couldn't do anything to discipline him, because the stalking didn't occur at our university. She and I both reported our experiences with him to the residential office, who then tipped off the campus police, who then spoke to the dean of students. The thing is though, when I gave his name to the residential office, they had no idea who I was talking about. He'd given me a fake first and last name, and I had to do a lot of searching to find out his real name. I knew he was sketchy when I saw the 4 separate IDs in his wallet, but I didn't ever think he'd given me a fake name when I met him. After talking to the residential living, I talked to the police. When I talked to the police, they didn't seem to care about what I had to say. Actually, the officer I spoke to talked over me while I was explaining the times he followed me, and said that he'd heard all he needed to hear. I spoke to the dean of students, who asked me some clarifying questions about the police report he'd received. The police had mixed up several details of my story with the stories of other victims. Apparently, more people than just me and the girl I met have come forward with information about this person. There are even reports that he got physical with 2 separate people before coming to this university. Last week, I saw him on campus. He's still an RA, even though multiple women have spoken to higher-ups about his behavior. If I hear from him, I'm issuing a no-contact order to ensure that he stays away from me. Right now, though, that feels like too much of a hassle because we're all going home for a 2-month break due to COVID education anyway. That's kind of it. It's anticlimactic, and there's no sense of justice in all of this. But hopefully this story teaches you all to stay on your toes and not to think you're overreacting when someone is being sketchy. Stay safe out there, guys. Me at work. I work at a large crafting store in California and have been there for a year and 8 months now. A little background before I explain what's been going on is needed. So last year we hired a guy we'll name Hayden. Hayden was a little quiet on the first day, but quickly became more talkative, and over the next couple of weeks started to never stop talking. He would constantly say weird shit, for instance. One day, he was put in charge of building furniture. Our store carries stuff like furniture and home decor as well. He was apparently having difficulty assembling the table he was working on, and said something about cutting his wrists if he can't figure out how to put it together. Another time we were both working in the stockroom, and he kept talking about how much he looked like the Parkland shooter, Nicholas Cruz. I'll admit he did in fact look like that kid, which was creepy. I remember one day I had gotten off work and was waiting for my ride to pick me up, when out of nowhere, Hayden walked up behind me. He just stood there with an awkward smile on his face, and I politely asked him, "What's up?" He said something to the effect of, "Oh, nothing much, just enjoying my lunch break. I'm thinking about going inside Taco Bell, right across the parking lot from our work, and shanking someone." He pretty much laughed and said he was joking after saying that. When my wife picked me up, we saw him walking toward the Taco Bell and just flashed us this creepy-ass ear-to-ear smile. So the last straw for me was when he and I were assigned to work our spring freight and get it loaded up on a large U-boat. Our shift started at 7 a.m. and was over at noon. It was 11 o'clock and we still hadn't finished our task because Hayden just wouldn't stop goofing around. He would also work very slowly on purpose and would only take one item to the U-boat at once. Our boss came to where we were working and was upset that we weren't done yet. He told us we would both get written up if the job wasn't finished before we were off. I was pissed off at this point and Hayden knew it. He seemed to feel bad for pretty much getting me in trouble and apologized. He then said something that really concerned me. He said in the most serious tone I'd ever heard him speak in since meeting him, "If I get fired, I'll shoot this place up." He went on to say that he knew where all the emergency exits were and would first shoot all the cashiers and then move on to the other employees in the store. I'll admit that I didn't immediately report what he said, but it did have me on edge and I kept thinking about what if. After some convincing from my wife, I finally did the right thing and informed my manager. They took a written report from me and contacted the police. After 2 more days of working with Hayden, he was fired and subsequently arrested for his threats. The week after he got arrested, my boss held a meeting with the entire staff and told everyone what happened. I don't completely remember what was said, but Hayden apparently admitted that he said what he said. and kept asking if I had been the one who reported him. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I was working at the same store, still am, and I was heading to the break room for my final break when I heard a voice from one of the aisles to the left. A man was standing next to the paint case and asked if I could get him some paint. While I was opening the case, he addressed me by name, which I immediately thought was weird because I wasn't wearing my name tag on this particular day. Out of curiosity, I asked him how he knew my name, and he said it was just a lucky guess, to which I thought was BS, mainly because his tone of voice seemed sarcastic. The entire time I was getting his paint, he was staring at me with a smirk on his face. He then began to ask me questions about my name, which is the same name as a popular TV show character. He asked what year I was born, why my parents decided to give me that name, etc. At this point, I started to walk away, and as I had other things to do, and the whole time I was walking away, he was still trying to talk to me. I heard him yelling my name from 3 aisles down. I went and stood in the warehouse until I thought he was gone. Later that same day, one of my coworkers asked me if I knew the guy who was buying the paint, and I told her I didn't. She told me that he had approached her and asked her all kinds of questions about me, like if I am a good worker and if she likes me as a coworker. This is an ongoing issue too, as he's come into the store 2 other times, one being yesterday during my day off, and apparently asked where I was. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that this guy might be cousins with Hayden, as they sort of look alike and have similar mannerisms. Both look similar to the Parkland shooter and have that same creepy vibe. This might not be the scariest thing on here, but it's still freaky. I'll update if anything else happens. Hey guys, so I didn't expect the responses I've gotten, but thanks so much for all the advice. I am safe and have reported this matter to my manager, who is thankfully taking this very seriously. I have not seen my potential stalker and am hoping to never see him again. Update. Tonight I worked the closing shift and was outside getting carts after the store closed at 8 p.m. when 2 SUVs pulled into the parking lot. One of them parked behind the store and the other one parked in the main parking lot. I was standing in front of the entrance doors when a man dressed in all black and wearing a hood stepped out of one of the SUVs. Another guy walked up next to him, and they both started approaching the store. I politely told them we were closed, and then I looked down to notice a large baseball bat in the hoodie guy's hand. I started repeatedly ringing the bell to be let back inside, and these 2 guys were just pacing back and forth in the lot staring right at me. My manager let me in and called the police. The guys were long gone when they got there. This could have easily been a totally unrelated incident, but I thought I'd still update because the whole thing makes me think it could be you-know-who. Years. In 2002, I was 14 years old, starting my freshman year. I was an awkward, nerdy girl who didn't know how to handle attention from boys, so you could say I made things worse for my situation. I had a knack for making friends with the weird people no one liked, but I tried to be friendly with everyone I met, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Unfortunately, that was also my downfall. Clubs were a big deal, and they actually had an anime club, so of course I was all about that. First club meeting, I sat next to a couple of friends and soaked it all up. I thought I was finally with my people. Then here comes Stalker Kid. I'd use his real name, but to this day I have no clue what it is. He sat in front of me, and being that person, I said hi. I could tell he was uncomfortable and didn't know anyone, so I was just being nice. And boy did this guy cling to me for that one word. At first, he would just find me during lunch and just stand there mumbling things to me. He had such a soft voice, high-pitched, mousy little guy that you just felt unnerved when he spoke to you. The way he would look at you as he spoke, I could never look him in the eyes. After a while, it became more about asking about my personal life and what I was into. Me being dumb and naive, I tried to be friendly and chat while feeling incredibly uncomfortable. After a while, my friends and I would move to different tables, benches, and even hallways to avoid him. But he always found me. After about a year of this, my best friend finally told me that if I didn't tell him to fuck off, he would. I really didn't want him around anymore, so sure, go ahead. So one day during lunch, here comes Stalker Kid with his signature greeting, barely above a whisper, "Hey, name." My buddy just goes, "Dude, she's not interested, fuck off." Looking hurt, he shuffles away. I was like, man, you didn't have to be so hard on him, but thanks. I didn't see him much around school after that, except for club days when he would just sit across the room and stare at me while my best friend glared at him. Cut to me being 16 and driving now, minus the awkward club days. I didn't really notice anything from him. That is, until an old gray, beat-up car started parking next to me like extremely close. One day after school, he was waiting for me in that car. He started asking me how I've been, what about prom, and all that stuff. I was trying to rack my brain on how he knew that was my car, unless he had been watching me before and after school. I started getting there later, and leaving later to avoid him, because he was like clockwork. Finally, a boy I used to be friends with in elementary school was walking out with me, and made a comment about how that guy is always next to my car, and asked if he was my boyfriend. I immediately said no, and he's always following me around, and I hated it. It was really starting to freak me out. Bless this guy, because he walked right up to him and scared him off, threatening if he ever parked near me again, he would kick his ass. I figured maybe that was enough to keep him away. So again, there was a small space where I would hear nothing of him except from my friends who had classes with him telling me how creepy he was. One friend had art class with him, and said he would draw naked women constantly in his books. All big, busted, sexy pose women. Classy guy. Junior year is wrapping up. And I started taking my BFF, Phil is what we will call him, to and from school. He was on my way, so I figured why not. At some point, Phil started noticing that the little gray car was always heading the same way after school, and made a joke thinking, what if Stalker Kid lived next to him? Haha, small world, right? I could only be so lucky. One day, as per usual, a little gray car was following us, so we took a detour. Sure enough, he was with us every step of the way, and it was no longer a joke. We both started freaking out. I pushed that gas pedal as hard as my foot could push it, and noped the fuck out of sight. I went home and told my mom everything, because at this point I knew this wasn't normal. She shoved it aside, saying I was probably seeing things, blah blah blah. Well, the time came for our end-of-the-year club party. Of course, SK, we'll call Stalker Kid from now on, was a senior, so I would never have to see him again. For whatever stupid reason, I offered to host the party, thinking he hadn't gone to one yet. Let's celebrate this moment. I was terrified when my dad let him in the door. I don't remember giving him an invitation to the party, so someone must have given it to him. He spent the whole party talking to me, and my dad being all buddy-buddy with him and asking me where my room was. I just wanted to cry and hide. It was all downhill after that. I remember there were days when I would hear a car pull up outside my front door, and my room had a window that looked out the front. I would call my buddy Phil and peek to see if it was him. 3 times in 1 month. I just hid under my desk and cried on the phone with Phil. Other events from school would be him asking a girl I played softball with to prom, only to dump her and follow me all night. This includes the after prom, where I never saw him in person. Our high school had a radio/TV channel for kids to run, and during prom they would record us going up the stairs and playing around in the gym at after prom for the parents to see their kids having fun. Took one of my friends to point it out, but it showed me playing DDR for a while against my friend Phil, and SK was standing right behind me watching for a good 5 minutes. I never knew. And the one that still creeps me out to this day is graduation for his class. Our classes were so big they did a day and night ceremony, where all the students had to attend the day one. I was scanning the crowd to see my friends who were graduating when I saw a hand wave as I passed by. I looked back, and of course it was SK waving at me. How he picked me out of a crowd of thousands I will never know. 2006, senior year was great. No signs of creepy SK to the point where I kind of forgot about him. I graduate, I choose a college in town, get a job at a local retail store and move on. Life was beginning to be normal. I work in the gaming department, so you get the weird randos once in a while. One that I saw a lot was this little Mexican guy with glasses. This is in, I swear, who never purchased anything but would just walk around from time to time. Then this motherfucker SK comes strolling in the doors and walks into gaming and just talks. I asked how he knew I worked here. He says his friends saw me and knew we were friends. I tried to radio for help over and over for someone to come and get him out. Finally, a big guy from computers walks by and asks for my help in the back. Once he pulls me to safety, I tell him everything. From that point, security is aware and is told to watch for this guy. Of course, he wasn't doing anything physical, so all they could do for me was watch out for him. So every time he came in, they would walkie me, and I would dip back to the warehouse. I started seeing his friend, who we called Ninja Friend, and F now, constantly, and all he ever did was walk around on his phone. I began to suspect he was texting SK to tell him I was at work, because, sure enough, 10 minutes later, he would come in too. So I tested this theory and started walking randomly around the store. At one point, a friend who worked register asked why I would do this, so I had her take a walk with me on her break. I told her this NF would follow us everywhere, even just going down a random aisle. Sure enough, he did, and she began freaking out. A few minutes later, I told her my stalker would walk through those doors. Again, sure enough. So I'm making my way to the warehouse, and NF steps out from an aisle and says, "She's right here." I just stared at him like, "Who the hell do you think you are?" SK walks up behind me and asks why I'm always running away from him, and, oh, he lost my number and asks if I can give it to him again. I say knowing damn good, and well, I never gave it to him, sure. I go to the warehouse, write this down. "This is where I work, don't ever come here again," and hand it to him, glare at his friend, walkie security about him, and sit in the warehouse and break down. Security tells me later that he also cried while they took him out. Later that day, as I'm leaving work, security offers to walk me to my car. This, of course, isn't the rule, but friends caring about friends. So I say sure. SK is out by my car waiting for me. So this is where security says fuck it and calls the police, which we are conveniently next to their headquarters. He books it when he sees the car. Few years go by. Nothing comes up. I buy a fancy new car and don't see him much. I'm thinking that did the trick and I'm finally free. 2012. My buddies and I are leaving work ready to hit a night at the bar per the usual Thursday deal. We are all walking out the door where we all have to stand and wait to hear the alarm sound to verify it's armed. As we are walking out, I hear it, that awful sound. "Hey, name." I cringe, grab my friend's arm, and turn. There he is, leaning on his car, waiting. My friend recognizes him and asks what he wants. Guy says he just wants to talk to me. He didn't ever see my car, so he didn't think I worked here anymore. His other friend is sitting in the back seat of his car, just staring at me blankly. I start to think the worst. If my friends leave me here, my gut tells me I'm not coming into work the next day. Or ever. I'm terrified that he's had years of time to think about our last encounter, where I wrote my number down and made him cry. I grab my friend's arm tighter. My friend goes off, pretends to be my boyfriend, and rips into him. My friend is about 2 feet taller and much, much bigger. They get into it, and I'm just standing in the parking lot, and I'm a terrible person for this, but I'm sure you understand at this point thinking, kick his ass. He spooks SK so bad that I'm pretty sure he pissed himself before getting in his car and booking it. Ever since, if he comes into the store, my friend stares him down from his office and he leaves. Never has bought anything in all these years. Years later, I've moved on, gotten married and moved out of town. Recently, we've moved back to start a business, and to this day, I still feel myself looking behind me at stores just in case I randomly bump into him. He caused me to have anxiety, mental and emotional pain, fear and trust issues for a decade. Even after moving on, I still feel the effects today, and I never even knew his name. Update. Alright, I wrote this last night while laying in bed on my phone, so there weren't a lot of specific details. To those who think I was playing the damsel in distress, no, I did not just roll over and let my friends do it all for me. These instances were just the big ones that I had friends to help me out. Yes, the way I handled him was terrible, but you have to understand that as soon as I heard him, my brain just froze, and I wanted the experience to last as short as it possibly could. And for a teenager, that stuff is terrifying. As I got older, I didn't tolerate his shit as much, because I thought after high school I was safe. After it started affecting me at work, I didn't just rely on my friends to help me. There are plenty of times that I encountered him that I haven't written in here, because they weren't anything more than the usual crap from him, like seeing anyone? How's work? I would make it short and be like, yup. I'm at work, man. Can you not bother me? So, once it got to the point that his little friend started following me around, and he was waiting for me, that's when my friend stood up for me. Also, a lot of people have asked me why I haven't just looked his name up in a yearbook. I never really cared to put a name to that face because I honestly wanted as little to do with him as possible, but after this post, I've reached out to my old high school buddies and asked if any of them have a yearbook I can borrow to find his name, so stay posted. Update 2. I have finally gotten my hands on a yearbook, and while I have taken a picture for my husband to finally see, I'm not going to show it on here. I can tell you that I have a name, which I will only share the first name, just in case this magically gets around for him to see. It's Christopher. The stalker who watched me through my windows and came into my apartment might be back in my life. 3 years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit, so the bottom of all our windows were level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, and not all the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm laying on the sofa and immediately runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes to look out every other window in the house, then walks around the outside looking in through the windows. When he comes back from this confusing exploit, I ask him what the fuck is going on and why he's being a spaz. I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up, he tells me. This was naturally very unsettling. But, after discussing it and considering the time of day, it was about 2 p.m., and the number of people out and about around the complex at that time, we came to the conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or someone passing by happening to glance in. With that, we forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, then when I went to answer, no one was there. I'd find things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing, around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen, face to face. His back was to an open window, with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window. Thinking I saw the reflection of my face in it, the window was open. It wasn't my face. There was a man with his face, pressed almost against the window screen, watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing, and it was late, I thought for a moment it might have been a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right on the other side of the window, so I spoke to him. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face did not change expression, and he did not blink or move. Just looked right at me, a way I have never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized that because of the window being level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was lying on the ground outside the apartment or crouched and contorted to look into the window. My heart sank. I buried my face in my boyfriend's chest and closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought I was messing with him. When I buried my face in his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone at the window?" Whispered yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time he did, the man was gone. It was at this point that I started to think about all the little odd occurrences that I had been experiencing, and I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded my apartment up with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother were on high alert. There were a couple of times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time he saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night I had an experience with this man, I was sitting at home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had picked me up from work an hour earlier. We had sat on the sofa together a little while when we got home. Then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch, scrolling on Reddit for a while in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear a door creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of my bedroom, so you can imagine my shock when I leaned over and see the door that's opening is the door to the water heater closet/small storage space. I look to my right and see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back at the door, and it's still creaking open very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it, a set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. That was going to be a no from me, dog. I ran my ass, barefooted out the door, into the snow, and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I called the cops. When everyone was back to check out the apartment, he was, of course, gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our shit, went to stay with my parents, and 6 months later moved 1,000 miles away from that town. That was the end of it. I initially found this sub around that time as I was trying to find other stories similar to mine, or people to talk to who had experienced something like I did. I had intended to write my story here eventually, and I figured, after this week's events, I had to. I live 1,000 miles away from where all of this happened, so a part of me thinks there's no way this person could have found me. But last week I heard a knock on the front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver and didn't answer. I'd go get the package later. Then they knocked again. And again. The third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes to check the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Someone was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. Then 2 days ago, I went out to get groceries. I have a little patio, and I go out there in the mornings to just chill or check on plants a lot, and I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day by accident. Never thought of it as a huge deal, until I came home from the store 2 days ago, and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. The deadbolt can only be locked from the inside of the apartment. Period. I assumed someone robbed me, because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister. I called my current new boyfriend. I waited for people to be with me, and I went into my apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken. At this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched. Nothing stolen. Someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside my apartment. I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he is not taking this shit lightly like my past boyfriend. I filed a police report. We checked for recording devices and cameras. He put Nest cameras up all over the place, and we're on high alert. I really, truly hope this is a coincidence. But if this man really followed me across multiple state lines, there's no one on this earth I'm less interested in meeting. And that's the end of today's unsettling stalker stories. And honestly, some of these were way too real. From creepy co-workers to complete strangers who just wouldn't back off. It's scary how common these experiences can be. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. Don't forget to hit that like button if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow. And if you've ever dealt with something even remotely similar, feel free to drop your story in my email or in the comments. Or just drop a "that last one was insane." I appreciate all. As always, I'm working on new videos. So if there's a topic or theme you want to see next, I'm all ears. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and I'll see you in the next one.